early on in my career, you were just looking at the company because this is going to be a professional opportunity. And when you're young, you're thinking of it as a job. So now, fast forward, when I am mentoring, I tell people the company's interviewing you. Therefore, you need to interview the company. And what I mean by
Yeah.
that is do your market research, but dig deep because the stories are there if you want to find out the most that you can about an organization, good, bad, or indifferent. So that's not digging for the bad. That's just digging to find out, like, what is the full spectrum of this organization that I'm aligning with? But then more importantly, as an adult professional, you need to know where your morals, ethics, and all of that stands. And where there is great alignment, there's great success. When
Absolutely.
there's misalignment, that's where you get trouble.
Thank you so much for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Today, we have the great pleasure of being joined by Lenora Sevillian. And Lenora is a procurement leader, procurement expert, seasoned veteran, and has such deep expertise in fraud and fraud prevention, especially in procurement. And it's the sort of thing that we don't like to talk about, but we really need to. Lenora, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, Sean, I'm really happy to be here. And, while it's my favorite topic, it's not for most people. So, fraud and corruption, yes, I live it, I breathe it every day, especially as a doctoral student. So, I'm super happy to be here to have the conversation around this and demystify it.
It's one of those things that I think sometimes people hear the word, but they don't really know what it is. Can you break it down for us? What is fraud, often in the context of procurement for organizations of substantial size?
So fraud is the actual thing. The corruption is really kind of, the ethos that it lives in, unfortunately. And so we're talking about bid rigging. We're talking about conflict of interest. We're talking about a non-competitive environment, embezzlement. All of the things that you would have in a natural environment, but it's really more associated with, public procurement, but also in the private sector. But you hear about it more from a public procurement perspective because, freedom of information, right?
Freedom of
And
information,
there's
taxpayer dollars.
more, right? And it's taxpayer dollars, and there's more of a hey, let's shine some light on this. But oftentimes it's after the fact, and so then you get prosecution after. But what we also want to shine a light on is what can be done beforehand and understanding why fraud and corruption happens inside of these organizations and institutions.
It's such a journey and there's such an education. There's a different frame of mind that we often need to look at things with when there's this kind of creative destruction is maybe a term that's used in other contexts for if you wanted to break this, what would you do? And then now we need to fix that and help prevent that. And sometimes we design for the happy path without the oh yeah, but we need to help prevent this bad thing from happening. It's a different lens in the way that we look at our intake or orchestration or procurement or P cards. Right? Those poor things,
Right.
those poor P card programs have been beat up so
Yes.
badly from all of the bad stories. It's not a bad procurement
No.
method. It's just been implemented so poorly so many times. So what else would you add in terms of the way that we would think about and the approach that you've seen be successful in helping to prevent it?
So let's just take P card, for example, because that's one of the things that people don't mind talking about. And it's so funny to me because I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of the simplest form, but guess what? There's a lot of other things that happen around that. So P card, there are many organizations that are super advanced, buying everything from, bridge construction to, every single thing that their suppliers offer. And then there are others where it's just like this really micro, nucleus of the organization that everybody's kind of hush hush about, and like only like, a premier few get a P card. But when you have policy, bless you, when you have
Thank you.
policy procedure in place, when you have a governance for that, when you have, here's the established training around the program, these are the do's and don'ts, and we're safeguarding it by thinking about what the audit trail should look like, what the approval process should look like, who is approving, and is there a conflict in the approval workflow. So for example, if you're in procurement and you're processing, you should not be approving. That's just like 101 of, securing your workflow.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a separation of duties, is what we call it professionally, so that there is less chance, right, of anyone trying to do something nefarious.
Yeah. That
Some
four
things
eyes kind of
are
approach, taking
right,
two different people
right,
at
right.
minimum.
Right, at a minimum. And so it also is dictated by the size of the organization and the number of transactions that are being, processed or flow through. And so now we're talking about the organization that is centrally set up. We also
Yeah.
have a lot of organizations that are decentralized, so you have an overlap of duties. There, you don't have the separation. You don't have, visibility to the various silos that have been put up. Because people have figured out, well, if I can shield this, I can then do whatever I need to do. So it goes anywhere from that, and that's just one scenario of P cards, but it goes to the competitive process. Are you being transparent? Are you really opening up, the solicitation so that all qualified people can fully participate equally on the
Yeah.
playing field that is leveled for everyone? And so as we talk about, and that's about inclusion in the competitive process.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
yes. And that's just plain and simple. And it has nothing to do with giving a firm a one up, but it's really about also when you craft scope of work and you're talking with your stakeholders about that, making sure that that scope is not something that a particular supplier has provided you for another project. And now you're
Yeah.
taking that and you're refashioning that, and that is your scope and your specs. And so it's really geared toward a supplier versus gearing it for the community to respond best value, best engineering, and best solution, product or service for the best value, not necessarily the lowest cost. While we do
Yes.
have a fiduciary responsibility, it really, in today's speak, it's really about best value with the notion that we still keep our budget in mind and we want the costs to be in line. So we're not going to go to the moon and back on cost, but we are going to look at that as a component of the evaluation process.
What I love about that is the emphasis on the objectivity of it and being able to have that third party come in and look at everything theoretically, not necessarily paying for that every time because that would be too
Right.
expensive. That would be a control that is prohibitively expensive, but doing it in a way where even if a vendor has a feature that nobody else has, it doesn't mean you can't say, tell me about whether you have that feature. That doesn't mean it can't be a question. It means that the rest of the questions and the objective view of the thing overall, it has to be done in a way where just because somebody has a special snowflake, it doesn't mean all the scoring is weighted to that. Because that's where
No,
it tips to being
absolutely not.
offside, right?
Right.
And
No.
I think there's that balance of you're allowed to ask the question. You just can't tilt all the weighting to it. And you also probably, if that one thing was really important or really valuable to the organization, you don't want to avoid asking the question to avoid creating a sense of impropriety. So there's this balance of judgment that's really, really tricky to
Right.
find the ethical high ground. And I think this is one of those things that it's really, really tricky for the uninitiated to learn enough to feel comfortable making those judgments, to use the common sense, to use the good judgment, which common sense, good judgment may be a rare commodity. Um,
No, and I
but
wouldn't say so. And that's where collaboration and partnership really plays, a very, very large part. So procurement is not the roadblock. Procurement is kind of the pathway of liftoff for your project to be done in a manner that checks all of the compliance boxes, but we also have room to make sure we have options with
Yeah.
regard to the value spectrum, with regard to the qualification spectrum, the contracting spectrum, and making sure all of those things kind of align, almost like, that's the Venn diagram, let's say,
It,
because you want to make sure all of that's blended and that there is no leaning. And so it's really about training for the evaluation committee as well. So all of those things kind of play into it, and it comes back to the very thing that a lot of people don't have structure or money for, and that is that training and development, that education piece, so that they understand, well, here are the things out in the ethos that I need to be aware of. Here's how I can tackle that. And then this is the application, because just because you learn something doesn't mean that it's going to be applicable in every single environment. You have to have the wherewithal to adapt what you're learning to your particular business case, your particular scenario.
Absolutely. What I love about that is the emphasis on the education, the development, the getting ready for these things, investing in yourself if you're a practitioner, and as an organization, helping to create the time, space, and ideally budget to help create
Right.
that. That education is such a powerful, powerful tool in making sure that things are done right, making sure that people even have the awareness, first of all, of some of
Yes.
the things to look out for, right?
Yes.
Like I want to get in a moment to some of the kind of the red flags, but there's the stigma of even talking about this stuff in the first place, right? There's that saying of snitches get stitches, and then there's the see something, say something, and there's a bit of space between those, but
Oh, for
I,
sure.
what I keep thinking about that education, the awareness that really helps water that down, but it takes a whole community to get all the way to the see something, say something,
Absolutely.
and to feel safe
100%.
doing that.
Yes. Yes. And that is an organizational thing that
Yeah.
no one addresses fully. So, there's grassroots, there are things that executives in the procurement world can do inside of their, ethos with their team. But when you're talking about ethical business, the code of conduct, the code of ethics, compliance, risk management, all of those things, again, that Venn diagram overlap and cannot be taken for granted at any level. And so while you can do some grassroots things within your environment, but it really comes down to, is your leadership, is the rubber hitting the road with your leadership where they are putting emphasis on, these are the things that we're going to do to establish a holistic governance, and we're going to abide by it, by the way, and there's going to be penalty, and there's going to be training around it. So no one can say, well, you know what, I work for this company but I had no idea that we had XYZ in place. And oftentimes it is really about a lack of awareness of the processes that are in place already. And I can
Yeah.
speak from that, from being a director in that role, where I come in and I don't change any policy or procedure. I just go to enforcement of what's on the books. And people will say, oh my gosh, you came in and you changed everything. No, I came in and changed nothing. I'm now coming in and holding you accountable to what's already structurally in place. And so that's always really comical to me, because it just puts emphasis on, people don't read. They don't really look to investigate, like, okay, well, what is going to be the result of if I do XYZ? Are there ramifications? And is there a policy in place for that? Now, some people are savvy enough where they know the policy and procedure, but they've also figured out a way to subvert the policy and procedure.
And I think this is one of those fascinating things where technology is now moving to the point where the policy, the procedure become one easy flow. And that's actually the easiest way to do it. To me,
Yes,
that's one of those things that I'm imagining you would agree that that's what good looks like today, but it takes investment and energy and all the rest of that to go
absolutely.
create that
Right,
and
right,
implement that.
right. And when you talk about technology, you're also talking about a heavy expenditure.
It can be. Yeah, it absolutely can be. And I think that that's the sort of thing where having your ducks in a row of understanding both what you need to be doing today and then sprinkling in some of the art of the possible is really important to be able to bring that four eyes or segregation of duties, and they make
Yes.
it easier to do it the right way than do it
Yes.
the wrong way. Plus, how are we keeping an eye out? What are the security cameras and locks and everything else to go make sure that we have a sign out front of our office and it says, we see all the great work you do because we have cameras. And we do. We have, most of our meetings are recorded and we have cameras in the office. And I think there's a sense of, at least for our team, this idea of do the right thing
Right.
because even if no one's watching, but, the world is
Absolutely.
watching, right?
Do the right thing even when no one is watching. Be the employee that you would want to hire if it were your company.
100%. This is such a wonderful example to get into some of those kind of ethics in procurement and some of those red flags or examples of like the bid low, change order high, or the, hey, listen, my cousin's really good at websites, but maybe leaving out the cousin part. Those just feel like two spectacular examples of things that just are not okay, but we know they happen.
Absolutely.
What else would you add to that?
So when we talk about, oftentimes people don't understand what big bid rigging is. And so it, on its face, it eliminates competition because two or more suppliers get together and decide, okay, you win this one, I will tag on as a subcontractor, and then next time, I'll put the low bid in because they're thinking that everyone's ethos is low bid only. So if they go low enough that they're going to win, but it is about the structure of the bid, the qualifications, all of the exemplary factors, hopefully, that you're exhibiting in, as you're expressing why you should be the person that takes on this product or service contract. And it's bid suppression, it's the rotation thereof. It is, either deflating, as an outlier, or inflating as an outlier. So when you have, if industry wide, if you do your market research and you're, say, in the public bidding space, you can go out and look at other people's bids after the fact to say, hey, were they in line? Am I like way out here? As Malcolm Gladwell will say, the outlier, right?
Yeah.
So you have the low bid outlier and then you have the highest bid outlier. And so those two things automatically tell you one or two things. Maybe they're in cahoots, maybe not. Or maybe our budget is not correct based on, where the other bids came in, and maybe all the bids came in like way over where your budget was. So it's two things as a lesson learned from that. What does the market sphere really look like? Are the outliers adjacent in some way? What does the average look like for all of the bids that you've received? And if all of those factors are not in your favor, then there's something structurally wrong internally, is my guess. And that's just in my experience. So I'm not speaking for every single professional out there, but from all of the 38 plus years that I've been doing this, those are the telltale signs, that I look at, that I teach to, that I inform my team of, and as we are doing our evaluation process and talking to our stakeholders, those are factors that come up. When we talk about, conflict of interest, we hear about a lot,
Yeah.
and I'll just leave it
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
so you're talking about, you have an interest in a company and you're putting that company forth. Or the company knows that you like to play tennis. And so they say, here are some tickets to this like premier tennis event, all expenses paid, and it's way over what an honorarium or that's allowable based on your governance for your organization.
Yeah, the,
So
the difference
mostly,
between something like that and some of those cool socks that you see as you're
right.
going to the airport that are like $20 covered in tennis, totally different things, right?
Right. And most of the organizations that I work for, they had a no gift policy, period. Not like, oh, if it's under $50. There are some organizations where it's under 100. But even with that, that's where employees, not just procurement, but in the whole ethos, get tripped up because you're so excited about the thing and you forget about the policy that your organization has on gifting. And so you automatically go for, the $100 truffles that, you receive from a supplier, and you start, oh my gosh, you want a truffle? Like, yeah, no, thank you. Did you think about we're not supposed to receive gifts? And that's just a very like benign thing, right? But
Yeah.
now you're talking about, a Rangers game, all expenses paid. Parking alone is like over $100, okay? So, when you talk about sporting events, everything is, in the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars uh, today, in today's world.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about your husband has an interest in a company or sits on a board, and you haven't disclosed, but you're going to evaluate that company as a potential supplier. So
Yeah.
I'll use myself as an example. My husband is retired now, but he was very much ingrained with AT&T, and T, and one organization I worked with. Um, AT&T was going to be under my governance, and I said, hey, I can, govern all these others. I can, have this under my umbrella, but I cannot have AT&T because of the affiliation with my husband. And I
Yeah.
disclosed immediately. And as I sit on advisory boards and boards, I will either not vote on something when it's a conflict of interest and disclose. So both of those actions are happening. However, I have seen where people have an interest, and rather than excuse themselves from a vote or chiming in, they go ahead and vote like nothing. And I'm like, did you forget that, we know that you sit on it? Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
You
just
remember
not an
how your
ethical
LinkedIn at the
business
bottom
decision.
says that you're an advisor to dot dot dot? Yeah, we ran into that. There was an
Precisely.
organization, I'll just say they were in the western portion of the US. And this person who was in a responsible position for selection and implementation of a solution also sat on the advisory board for the company that they were putting forward. And you can appreciate how maybe they really like that solution, but the optics are terrible,
Very bad.
right?
Very bad.
So it feels like the kind of thing where um, it is so important to make sure that if all of that context was in the newspaper, front page, how would you and your mom feel? Your
Well, not only
significant
that,
other feel,
your
right?
organization suffers as a result of showing up, as we call it in the procurement world, above the fold of the newspaper, or a
Mm.
news story, or someone from your organization goes to jail for embezzlement or fraud or corruption. And
Oh
those,
man,
all of those things have happened, and I have personally experienced all of that throughout my
right?
career at various places. Now, you talk about kickbacks and bribery. So, in some organizations, the leadership is driving this sometimes, not all the time. So, now you're talking about an abuse of power, which is
Hmm.
not even on the list. But if your boss says, hey, Lenora, go ahead and process that, I'm telling you to sign off on that. Most people don't have the gumption to say, well, that's really just not, it does not align with my personal ethics. And so,
Yeah.
one of the things that I teach when I'm talking about ethical business decisions and ethics and morals and procurement, early on in my career, you were just looking at the company because it was, this is going to be a professional opportunity. And when you're young, you're thinking of it as a job. So now, fast forward, when I am mentoring, I tell people the company's interviewing you. Therefore, you need to interview the company. And what I mean by
Yeah.
that is do your market research, but dig deep, because the stories are there if you want to find out the most that you can about an organization, good, bad, or indifferent. So that's not digging for the bad. That's just digging to find out, like, what is the full spectrum of this organization that I'm aligning with. But then, more importantly, as an adult professional, you need to know where your morals, ethics, and all of that stands. And where there is great alignment, there's great success. When
Absolutely.
there's misalignment, that's where you get trouble.
I think it's a really powerful guide, that gut feeling,
Yes.
Because if an executive comes down on high and says, redraw the lines on how we evaluate or measure or something here because dot, dot,
Not
dot,
cool.
right?
Right.
Just not on, it doesn't feel right.
Right.
And when it doesn't feel right, there's probably a really good reason for that.
Absolutely. I can tell you, absolutely.
So I feel like there's a great opportunity to really have every member of the supply chain community make sure that they invest personally in understanding what these things are to recognize those signs. Because to the uneducated, it can be very easy to fall into the trap
Yes.
of, yes, sir, how high, sir?
Yes.
Or, yeah, I just got to get this done because it's a priority. And then all of a
Absolutely.
sudden, all kinds of other things fall out. So, what resources, like, I mean, you're part of an organization that helps the community with this kind of education. Can you help us double click on that just a little bit for those that want to learn more, Lenora?
Right. So it's A&I Cooperative Services. So it is a nonprofit member owned, and that's really key, member owned. Every member has a share. And so, as a service to our members, our professional development and education is free to all of the members. And
Beautiful.
that is at www.eandi.org. And you can
E
go
and
and
I
look at
dot
our
org.
Ed Pro Hub. There's a community where you can communicate. If you do not want to, say, speak up in person, you can, use the platform to ask questions, to inquire, and to learn.
That's so, so important. There's that reinforcement of the curiosity because the curiosity unlocks the understanding that helps us dig deep, understand what really matters. And
Absolutely.
at the end of the day, who we are as individuals is going to make the difference for what really matters. The
Right.
impact that we have on the world, have we left it better or did we do it all for fame? Right?
Absolutely. 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 And
So,
that's why I do the work that I do, because I want to leave it better. I am trying to, the way I would imagine it if I had full control is what I strive for. Not perfect. I certainly can't say I haven't made a bad decision or two or three or four. And
if
so
anyone
it's
does, they're stretching it.
So it's out of all of that experience comes additional knowledge, but I'm never the smartest person in the room, nor should I be, because there is a whole environment out there, both nationally and internationally, that has knowledge beyond what we can take in sometimes. But it's being open to learn, to share experiences, and to really admit when we don't know something, and that's okay. That does not mean that you are less than a professional. It just means that you haven't experienced these things yet. And so, understanding again where you're dealing with a fake supplier or the product or service substitution, which inflates costs, it's a bait and switch that you hadn't agreed upon. And the vendor or the supplier is profiting from that because they have this extra percentage that they're saving that they're not telling you about.
Yeah.
Falsifying invoices. I am actively on a witness in a trial that keeps being delayed for just that thing. Supplier inflating the invoices well beyond the contract. They got caught. And so these things really happen, and I think it's really about doing your research. So it's not just looking for all the bad eggs, it's just to acquire knowledge and understanding of what's really happening in the real world.
Absolutely. And I am so grateful, Lenora, for you sharing this with the community and for the work that you're doing to go and help create and offer better education to help all of us on our never ending climb. Thank you again for joining us today. And thank you for watching another edition of the Never Ending Climb for Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.